on?
Let me just check here.
Because I emailed Betsy, because when she called me about something, she said she was going to notify all members of the subcommittee about something she wanted to have added. And I have to tell you, we talked for so many other non-related things, I couldn't remember and I didn't write it down. So I emailed her yesterday and I assured her that we would put it on the agenda under other if she would let us know what it was. And she told me she was going to tune into the meeting. That's why I'm asking.
Yep. So she's not on yet. However, she did send me so she sent an email to me after our last full committee meeting. And then she followed up on Monday. I added it to the tracker today. So I'll point out, actually, I'll bring up her email and highlight her two ads. Because one of them, well, actually, only one of them will be this subcommittee. The other one was for section 704, I believe.
Yeah, I thought, we only had one. When you said two, I didn't discuss two with her.
No, just one for the subcommittee. So I'll pull that up and we can discuss that when we get there on the agenda.
Okay.
So do you want me to pull up the agenda so we can take a look at what we want to accomplish?
Well, I have mine in front of me. I did print it off because I take my notes on the agenda, printed agenda, so I don't get too distracted or too confused.
Okay. Well, take it away, Annalee.
Okay. So the first thing was to review the summary notes from the previous meeting. Tony sent them out to you yesterday. I haven't been calling them formal minutes, so do they look complete to you, Rich?
They look fine. I'm good with them.
Okay. So then I got to review Article 5 and 6. I didn't get 6 onto the tracker. After I heard back from you, Liam, that you were going to look at it, or that you did, Rich, I took a nap and then didn't come back to look anymore. Sorry. The home office problem has gotten to me. But apparently Article 5, at least Rich agrees that it's accurate when read in combination with the email I sent about what was missed.
Yep. No,
Do I
those
interpret that?
Those are the items that we still haven't made any decision about.
Right. So why don't we go to those now, which are in the email. Let me get to that page in my notebook. And I tried to, how can if I thought about this later, do I need to click on the box to open it up? Because some of the boxes are so narrow, I can only read one line.
Yeah, you just have to, with your mouse, just pull sometimes adjust the width or the height of the cell.
Well, I tried to do that because I use Excel all the time and I just was unable to do that. So,
yeah.
So somebody else can help me when we get to the one from Allison. Okay. So I had, after going through the tracker for Article 5, one of the issues was whether or not the town budget should be put to a vote, as well as the school budget. The tracker seems to indicate from some others that we ought to do that. Have you thought much about that, Rich?
Yeah, I'm not keen on putting that to vote. We have to do the school budget because of state law. And there is no state law on the town budget. And we have representative government. If we don't like the way they're budgeting, then we can vote people out of office and get elected. But I mean, I think putting the town budget out to vote, it creates an additional level of activity that's not necessary. It's not as big a portion of the budget, and I don't think it's as big a problem.
So I think, wasn't that also a suggestion that came in from the Steve Hanley Hamill group too, that be put out there? And I think Leanne Casalonis from the school board suggested it on the tracker as well. I think her approach was one town, one budget. I think that the whole budget would be voted on. For me, if it ends up going that way, I think it complicates things where the rules for the school department are different than the rules for the state law for the town. So to combine them together, I think.
I mean, we certainly could require that as part of the town charter.
Right.
But, you know, there are a lot of things that town government does, but there's nothing really more important than the budget. You know, I mean, it makes ordinances and does rules and all that kind of stuff, but the budget ultimately is the most important thing it does. And we elect people to run the town. And, you know, we've got a manager and we've got the town council, and they can come up with a budget. And as I said, if we don't like it, we can vote them out of office when the time comes.
Well, that takes a while, but anyway, people forget, but as I've noticed.
Well, if they forget, then it wasn't that important. You know?
Exactly. So, yeah, I've thought about it, and certainly if I wanted to support having it go to the vote, I would support the town budget and the school budget being voted on the same ballot in June, not two different ballots for sure, but as two separate items, not as one vote, because of what has to happen if it doesn't pass is different. And that's why the change I made in the tracker deleted reference to what happens if the school budget doesn't pass, because state law tells us what happens. So I saw no need to continue that language in the charter. And it looks like the previous group, which I was a part of, I guess, but I don't remember the details, decided in the charter to treat the town and the school, to treat the town as the school is treated with regard to state law. So you'll notice that I deleted reference to what happens if the budget doesn't pass from there. I don't know whether that was, it's not something we discussed, but it seems to be consistent with state law.
Well, we did actually talk about that, Annalee, and decided in, I think it was 503, or maybe it's
I think it's 503, yes.
That we would introduce a second sentence.
Right.
What I put into the red line version of 5 that I sent around. So we now have in the red lines in 503 say, if the town doesn't pass, then we revert to the last budget.
Right, that's what I put in the tracker.
Yeah, and if the school doesn't pass, then state law determines what happens.
Oh,
which is exactly what you said. I mean, it's just
right. I just left out the wording, you know, which I wanted to talk to you all about, whether we should add that sentence back in about that state law would dictate what would happen. Because if state law ever changed, I guess the council would be able to address that mid-course correction on its own, as long as they put it to a vote, because what the voters say about that's irrelevant.
Yep.
So that's why reference to state law sometimes bothers me in documents like this, because it has to be voted on. And when somebody vote yes or no, because they liked or didn't like the state law, when in the end, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
All right, so.
I just asked a question about intent behind the proposed change to revert back to the, so we're talking about reverting back to the prior year's municipal budget, correct?
Well, I didn't know how to write that, but it was the budget that was in place, because prior year, if this is done in June, that could be the year before, and that isn't what we mean the budget that's maybe it should say the last approved budget or something like that, the last adopted budget. So the intent is the budget, let's say that the budget was passed in June, or not passed, not voted on, or you wait till July. I think our intent was the budget that was in place on June 30th is what we meant.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, again, the red line that I sent around says, in the event the town council shall fail to adopt the non-Board of Education components of the budget within said 60-day period, the non-Board of Education components of the budget then in effect shall automatically become the budget for the fiscal year.
Well, I don't remember. You probably sent it and I missed it. I didn't remember that email, so I did the wording differently
Well, it
than
doesn't
that.
matter. I mean, in the end, we're gonna have to put them into a red line on the, on some
Right.
document anyway, so,
But we're saying the same thing.
yes, yeah.
So I suppose my question is then, is that, so obviously, the municipal budget is made up of both, expenses and revenues. And so is it the intention to, in the interim, fix both of those for the prior year, or simply the spending authority or expense authorization?
So
Well, you have
explain
to have
how
both.
how can you separate them? They go together.
Well, I mean, again, I think that with a new, you talk about adding, so in a new year, we have generally added value, right? So we have more
Right.
tax
Mhm.
properties come on the rolls. So that would inevitably modify your revenue lines. And so I guess the question is the failure to adopt the non-educational portions of the budget, will that fix or again, the rate or the amount of revenue to be generated by taxpayers? Is that sort of that's really the threshold that I think people would care about, right? You'd fix either the expenses or the amount to be generated from property tax revenue. Or is it just going to say, well, or is the intention to say, yes, there's additional value that's being brought on the tax rolls through, building and development, but we're not going to allow that to be taken into consideration until we have I guess that's my question.
Yeah, I think that's what we're saying. I'm pretty sure it goes together.
I mean, the tax rate stays the same, the mill rate, because that's what the previous budget, and the expenditures stay the same. I mean, every year you have, during the course of the year, right, you have property that comes online or property that goes offline and does or doesn't pay more taxes.
Mhm.
So you always have that, the revenue is always fluctuating over the course of the year, one way or another. So I don't think that that's the intent. It's just whatever existed continues.
Because my understanding, both on the school and the town side, is revenue that comes in it that wasn't anticipated at the time the budget was adopted can't be spent, except it has to, because it wasn't approved in the budget. At least that's how it worked on the school board. If we got revenue that wasn't known or anticipated when the budget was adopted, that can't be spent.
Well, right, it would just flow to the general fund, right?
Right, except, maybe a specific grant that somebody got for a specific project, that might be an exception. I can't recall. But I certainly know even individual and private donations had to be approved by the school board. I don't know about the town side both to accept the money and to spend it.
I guess that's just my question. Is it really the spending authorization that there's an interest in locking in the absence of an approved town council budget? Is essentially capping expenditures at prior year.
So what's the motive for that question? Is if as Richard says, the property values go up or some big industry comes into town and we're collecting more taxes, would that, in your mind, prevent us from collecting those taxes because they weren't anticipated?
Well, I think it ignores it. I think I guess I feel like if the action is to fix expenditures, then effectively that would theoretically reduce the tax rate in the interim because you'd be bringing on the additional value, right?
The tax rate is part of the budget, and so you can't change it. Right. So if you end up with more revenue, that's fine. It just sits in the fund unspent.
Yeah, right.
Well, let me ask you about that, Richard, because the tax rate is not set till well after the budget has been adopted.
Right.
That tax rate isn't set to the mill rate isn't set till August, September, something like that.
But once it is set, it stays in place, right? You wouldn't reset it.
I think that, yeah, I guess I haven't known that to happen. I don't know if it can or not. So, because when the budget's adopted, people don't really know the mill rate. It's a predicted
Right.
number, is it not? It's always
That's
pretty close, but it's a predicted number.
No.
That's correct. So it's not set till generally August, after commitment.
Mhm.
Yeah. So, yeah, I guess, so again, maybe I am getting confused by it, but I would think that the intention would be to fix expenses, but recognize that revenues may, there could be a change. I mean, obviously at the state level, right? So the legislature could vote to bring revenue sharing up to 5%. And so that would inevitably decrease, that increase the revenue sharing, theoretically decrease the burden on local, the funds that need to be generated through local taxation. And so, fixing expenses in the absence of an approved budget would be one thing. I think that also fixing revenues that have evolved or changed or been updated, theoretically, that would only net a positive impact for the taxpayer. Again, presuming that revenues increase.
Well, the people who raise this, that I think would be the intent, is that just because you get more money doesn't mean you should spend more money. It means that, would be nice to have, I think there would be people that would support, it would be nice to have that taken into consideration and reduce that mill rate because we've got a windfall. Or to put into the operating budget at some point, things that we bond that shouldn't be bonded. Because because that's how we solve our budget problems, especially the school side. They just move it into capital and they still get it a different way. So, I think there are people, the more conservative taxpayers want to see that stopped or slow down. Let's put it that way. So I think that our intent is the entire budget stays intact. Because you can't spend that money without an adopted budget anyway, is my understanding.
Not unless it's some emergency of some kind. But no, I see your point, Lee. I mean, and I think that, it is the spending side of it that is ultimately getting established here by the previous budget. Just like under the current arrangement, if there's no budget passed, then it's the spending part of what the town manager has presented, which gets adopted. And then the mill rate gets established when commitment occurs. And so it would be exactly the same structure. It's only a question of what the spending numbers are. So yes, you're right.
One just follows naturally the other, really. It's hard to separate them. So, all right. So I think we have an agreement on that. We might have a split decision about the town budget, but I'm leaning siding with you. And by the end of this conversation, I will have thought that through a little bit more. So question 2 that I found was pending from this section is to what extent, if any, can the town and school department use taxpayer dollars to advocate for its own causes, i.e. budget and referendum? I thought we had some consensus, but we wanted to wait for Alan, and that's now out of the picture, that we thought that should be prohibited from using taxpayer dollars to buy ads or email lists or proprietary information that the town or school has with regard to contacting people to advocate. Am I saying that right, Richard?
You are. The problem, though, is once we start down that path, saying what you can't do becomes tricky. I mean, it's, I don't know if there's an easy way of saying this in a charter. I think that there are policies that certainly make sense, but I'm not sure what it really means for you not spending money to do it.
I've thought of a couple of things, because certainly the people advocating for this believe wholly that the entity should provide factual information. So does factual information certainly can be written in a favorable light that appears like advocacy, but it isn't at all. I mean, I think the judgment question becomes difficult. But would publicizing facts also include negative impacts? For example, if you vote for this, whatever, here's what it's going to cost the taxpayers, but here's what it's going to do for the taxpayers. You know, I think if it presented both sides. Another choice that I've thought about is if I got calls, this was several years ago, but I got calls from people who were annoyed that the school department was using email that parents had designated for school business only, using that email to advocate for passing the school budget and it was only, of course, people who were opposed to the school budget who objected when the school had special directions. This is for my kid. This is for school closings. This is not for advocacy. So I thought about, well, if people who were opposed to the budget could have access to the same information so they could put their own story out there to the same group, would that satisfy everybody? I mean, I'm in at least one organization that the email won't be shared, but the organization agrees that if somebody wants something distributed, the organization will do it for them, but they will not share the email because they had so many objections from people who didn't want their email sent out in that way. So I don't know if that's too complicated in a charter, that's all, but there was enough annoyance about that it would be nice to have that addressed more publicly.
I agree with you. It is annoying. I just think that all it does in the end is, if we put it in the charter, is it just sets up grounds for, if people want to do it, an interminable number of lawsuits. I mean, every piece of information that gets distributed around anything that has a positive and a negative, or a for or against side, is going to look like it's advocacy. There's no way to disguise it. And I think, in the end, if it's against the charter, you now have a vehicle for, going to court and saying, and it's
in reality, the town has the money and the individual who has the objection doesn't have the money to fund such a thing. So it's certainly a out of balance power. It's based on money, but I guess a lot of lawsuits aren't they? Who has the money?
I assume that people put out, lots of information. As I say, going back to the fire truck recently, there were at least half a dozen articles one way or another around the fire truck in which town officials were quoted, or the fire chief had written the article. I mean, all of them were at one level advocacy, but they were also providing information. Yeah. And I think, trying to decide whether or not that's appropriate, I think we just rely on good faith. It's a small town, and
well, my notes show that we're not going to recommend this because of the difficulty in determining what is advocacy. Really, that it's a two-edged sword, and it probably would cause more problems than it would be worth, frankly. So the next one is in my email, was an Allison comment that I only could read one line. That was on 502.1.2. I don't know Allison's full statement here about itemized statement of appropriation for current operation and permanent capital expenses. I said, I believe we've already done that for operations, and we've made recommendations regarding the capital budget, but I'm not sure. That's a guess. Is that my statement? Is my summary of what she wanted accurate?
And that's what I interpreted it to be.
You think so? All right, so we've taken care of that.
No.
Okay. So the last one is section 506, which is transfer of appropriations. And again, that was in the tracker by who, Allison?
And also that was Councillor Gleistein's contribution, which I can pull up and share if you.
The new one, I remember what the new thing she was concerned about is now, but maybe it will be a little different than what she sent you.
So just going back to Miss
Gosh, my
Bristol's,
nose itches. I'm so sorry for that. It's terrible.
Miss Bristol's comment, I believe, was discussed by the group, and I think the feeling was that the Cape Elizabeth language was it sort of only allowed, it was sort of more prohibitive, and I think that if I recall, this is a conversation Alan was involved in. The comments were that there's no reason to be that prohibitive, or there didn't seem to be a justification to recommend a change. But that was my recollection on that.
That was mine too, but I just couldn't remember exactly what it was she was suggesting.
Yeah. So let me pull up Councillor Gleistein's.
Okay.
And then we can take a look at it. Bear with me.
That's 7. Do you have 5 in there?
Yeah, it's right here.
Okay. Yeah, that's what she talked to me about. Let me share the background that she explained. Richard, did she send you anything?
I didn't see this, no.
Okay. Yeah, because she said she was going to send it to me. She spent quite a while talking about that with me, and I thought said was going to get a hold of you too. So when I forgot her name, but when Liam's predecessor as assistant town manager resigned to become a town manager elsewhere, Liam somehow inherited or hired or appointed was to replace her as assistant town manager as well as the HR director. And then, so a new position called communications director, maybe she has it in here, or was that the position, communications something or another was created, which was a new position, which was not in the budget, but the money for the combined positions and whatever were used to create a new position. And she said that she supports the position, and while she's sure that would be approved, that the normal course of events is new positions are approved through the budget process. So she wanted to have us discuss about to what extent can just things be combined, new positions. I did ask her that. I said, well, did it exceed the budget for however those positions were included? Because I can't believe that Liam didn't get paid more for taking on another job. I mean, how much of her pay was used for this new position? And she didn't know the answer to that. And the other problem was if the position is appointed in the middle of the year, of course, it only uses half, let's say, for what was budgeted. And then next year you've got the position for the whole year. So it has an impact on the budget. Did I explain it pretty well what she said?
Yeah. So and there was some discussion at the council level. So I guess I would characterize this, to use a term, as a reorganization. And what occurred was when the former assistant town manager resigned, the town manager decided to combine the assistant town manager role with an HR director role, and then reconstitute what I call a full-time equivalent, the approved full-time position from, essentially create a new position, but it was still under the same. I think the argument was that it did not increase the number of full-time positions. It reorganized the departments and create a new iteration of a position. In terms of the funding, it was within the approved authority of the budget. Actually, I think it was about a $20,000 reduction, and that included the that included the amount of time that essentially a position was vacant between when Larissa left and Allison was hired. So the discussion at the council level, I think to summarize, was whether that was in the purview of the town manager, or whether that should have, a reorganization in that same form should have been approved by the council. And I think that the other piece to note is that because HR and executive kind of fall under the same line item authority, as kind of reflected in the budget, that it wasn't actually transferring funds or didn't require the transfer of funds from one cost center to another. And so that's sort of the background.
All right. Yeah, that's how I understood it from her. And so our discussion revolved around that under that scenario, it's possible to build in positions. Well, let me ask you a question before I make this statement. So if nothing changed next year for the budget for those positions, no pay increases, nothing changed, would it still be within that amount since it would be for a full year?
Yes.
It would, okay.
Because essentially we made some adjustments to, we also increased the level of authority or the position for an HR specialist became a deputy HR director. And then, but all of that was within the authority, the budget authority as approved, even on a full year basis.
Okay.
Something less than.
So anyway, that's the story, Richard. And the reason for this, I'm a little bit inclined to agree with her because I know how it's possible for, quote, empire building to begin by the way you do these positions. They do it at the state. Should those new positions be approved? Now, I only work with small entities, but any new position with a new title, a new job is approved by the elected officials, but it's even in a town manager form of government. So I guess because of my experience, I lean towards supporting what she says, that because once you reorganize these positions, they seem to stay. I mean, the next budget wouldn't cut them is I think her concern, but I can be persuaded either way. She has been very persuasive in my own experiences. So go.
Liam, in the budget, I haven't looked. Are the positions not at the managerial or executive levels, but are the positions spelled out for everybody that has a position in state government, including the lifeguards, including the community services people we hire in the summer, including the number of people that work at City Hall behind the desk? Is all that spelled out, or is it an appropriation with some notion of FTEs?
It's an appropriation of some notion of FTEs. We certainly can drill down in the budget, and you could pull out from, a $200,000 department budget. You could extrapolate the 3 positions that's made up of, but we don't. There's some budget documents where you can, you see that $200,000 total, and you see each position clearly spelled out. That's not how we structure things. And again, I think that was the argument for, again, the council level. I think the argument on the other side of whether that was within the town manager's purview is we authorize the manager on an expenditure or a budget basis. That's the authorization. And, that he should have the ability. I think there is a different sensitivity if it was adding an FTE, adding that benefits package, expanding the full-time employment roles, but that wasn't the case in this instance. And I think that would have felt kind of differently. And that's how I look at new positions is, adding FTEs. Again, certainly Betsy has a compelling argument that, I think her argument is any change to the approved staffing and, disciplines and job titles, again, that kind of can get squishy, but that's why I think she's pitching. There should be a conversation or authorization by the council to make those changes. Others feel that should be within the purview of a town manager and his authority to appoint, hire, and really manage his staff beneath him, with the fewer exceptions being, assessor. So anyway, that's the piece.
Let me follow up with a couple questions. So the town, would it be possible for the town, for a department that has a budget authorized for 3 FTEs, let's say, to divide 1 or 2 of those jobs in half and still have 3 FTEs, but have 6 employees? That could happen under what you're saying.
I believe that's correct. Yep, you could. Yep.
So the follow-up question to that is that in the salary line, it wouldn't cost any more at all. But the potential for it to cost more would be in the benefit line, depending where your benefits cut off. How much do you have to work to get full benefits? How many hours? I'm sorry.
30 hours.
Okay, so you've taken the ACA number as at 30 hours. So if you divided the job into 2 20-hour positions, they would not be eligible for benefits from the town, including health insurance.
Correct. And so that's where the sort of line item authority would fall in, is that irrespective of the benefits cost, there's an authority, a spending authority that's been authorized by the town council. It's the manager's job to remain within that authority.
Although sometimes that's difficult with fringe benefits because you don't always control the town's share of retirement, for example. That's decided by somebody else. Medical insurance.
Challenges with all across the budget.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we're not saying that the town manager can't do it. The town manager just has to come back to the council and ask for approval to create a new position. It's, we give the town manager spending authority, but we don't, it's not one budget, it's budget by department. And if you want to change things, you just come back to the council and ask for the change. I'm not that concerned about adding a new positions requirement here as well. I think that's not that unreasonable. And if you can't get the council to do it, then we probably shouldn't do it.
Yeah, I'm leaning that way too, Liam, because of some experiences where people are hired and then, as you know, after they work so many hours, they need to be offered Maine State retirement. So you can end up with additional people into the Maine State retirement system that you hadn't anticipated because of the hours they've worked. And once they're in, I believe that they're permanently in there, no matter how much you reduce their hours. So there's some unintended cost, I think, that happen. Or if some of these people begin to work over the 20 hours for whatever reason.
Well, the argument, I can see the argument is that, like, you bring on a new position, it's still within the spending authority of the town manager. But when you get to the budget next year, now it might exceed that spending authority, that number. And so the council then has to say, well, we're either going to get rid of this person or we're going to up the spending limits. And that presents an awkward situation because you've offered this person a position, he or she's worked for 6 months, and now you're going to say, well, no, we don't want it. It's probably better to have said, no, we don't want it before you hired them. So I don't see any real problem. I don't think we're taking away anything from the town manager on the new position issues. Just come back to the council and say, hey, I'd like to do this. Can I do it? Sure.
I guess, yeah, that's true, Richard. I mean, I think that's the reality with a lot of things, right? I mean, we, costs change and there are difficult spending decisions every year. And some of them do have staffing implications for existing staff or new staff or long-term staff. I think the only thing I have, and again, I certainly, well, I don't have an opinion on officially on any of these things, but I think the only thing I would seek some clarification on is how to define new positions. When I think historically we talk about new positions, and I'm not saying that Councillor Gleistein's point's not well taken. I mean, this is clearly establishing a a position that we did not have. But when we talk about new positions in the budget context, we talk about adding, additional FTEs is where the kind of lightning rods always are. It's an additional benefits package. It's an additional full-time position. And so I think that that's how we've traditionally used that term. I think that what we want to be clear here is that we're talking about any restructuring or reorganization irrespective of budget authority within the cost centers that have been approved.
So what would you recommend? Let's say Richard Knight conceptually would recommend this suggestion go forward. How would we change that?
What if we said, or new full-time permanent positions? Would that solve the problem, Liam?
I think it would be, I think you could say additional full-time positions or
I don't think that would do it, because based on what you said, if you consider it by FTEs, it's not additional. It's the same number of FTEs. It's a new title, new function.
So right. So I think what Councillor Gleistein's, and again, let me just make sure she hasn't come on, but I don't want to.
Yeah, she said she wanted to come to the meeting to talk about it. So.
No, no one's here yet.
Okay.
So I guess I think that the concern I would have if I were the manager is, does this prevent, as we know, the world can change fairly quickly. I think that, will the manager still have the ability to reorganize the allocation of full-time positions, again, through attrition, in a manner that he or she feels they need to do to meet the needs of the community? And I think that the clear articulation in this instance was, we've been talking about communication and community engagement for years now, and the lack thereof. And so, he saw a way to meet a need within his budget authority, both in the current year and within reason in future years. And again, I don't disagree with, if it's a sound concept, then the council should be supportive. But I think if we're always have an eye to how it could be misused, or essentially a manager would be saying, I feel I need to dedicate resources to this initiative or this function. And if you have a council that says, well, frankly, we don't support that or don't want that, then I guess that's the conversation, right? Is that,
well, they're gonna take it out next budget anyway, right? I mean, if you can't get them to approve it now, then you're never going to get them to approve it at the next budget. And now we do this for 6 months and it's all disappears.
And I think also, would the council want to say, all right, this word communication is pretty squishy, because nearly everybody that runs for town office, they're going to improve communications. I think there's a council member in charge of that. How do you measure whether this position was effective or not, or hasn't morphed into doing a ton of other things besides, quote, their original purpose? Have more people expressed interest to participate because they've gotten the word out? How do you measure whether somebody like that is effective? And when you put it in like this, they resign from another position, presumably come to take this job. And it's been the philosophy of this manager that there should be absolutely no layoffs, nothing like that. So what do? You morph it into another position and give that a shot.
I guess my whole point is, I think that I think my suggestion would be that there's further clarification on what is defined as a new position. And so I think,
I would agree.
That's simply a job title, if we have again, using my department, if we have a HR coordinator resign and we feel that a more appropriate title is an HR specialist with some, additional responsibilities or maybe some restructuring, is that something that's requires town council authority, or is that something that's permissible? So just where that line is, I think, is my question, because new position.
We need to hear more from Betsy then, I think,
Sure.
a little bit more, and to see if we can get her to participate, when we schedule another meeting, is to get her to participate. And if she can't, then we just have to move forward, because at some point, I know it's not uncommon to have an assistant town manager and an HR person combined, but it seems like for a town of Scarborough, that's really a big order. That's two big jobs. When I noticed what your predecessor was involved in, wow, it seemed to be taking a lot of her time. So, wonder if they decide this isn't a good fit, that we need two different positions. So do you hire the communications person with the idea that they could take either one of those jobs so we don't increase the FTEs, or, I mean, there's all those long range plans, and making a decision for the moment versus for several years out always is a conundrum, I think.
Yeah, I think we're pontificating on all the challenges of management and organizational
Yeah.
structure, and I think that's all fair, but I don't think that we're going to come to a conclusion or an answer.
We need more information from Betsy, because I think the new position definition, because even saying a new full-time permanent position, I don't think changes the definition of new position.
Yeah, that's fair. Again, I'm going back to how we've characterized through things like budget discussions the phrase new position, and the new position has been interpreted to be an additional FTE over what's been authorized in prior years.
All right, so let's just put this thing on hold for the time being and get some more information from Betsy, and that would have been, I think that would be more helpful, because where there's an inclination now to support this, I can understand new position is can be defined in more than one way, and why put it in if it's going to be defined, make it more complicated for sure. Okay, so did she have anything else on 5?
That was her contribution on 5. She had another contribution on long range planning, but that falls to a different subcommittee.
And in my view of the tracker, that's as far as I got. I did not look at Article 6. And fortunately,
we have talked about Article 6 in the past.
Right, it's pretty short. I don't think that we made any recommendations for changes in Article 6 at all. And do you have the tracker handy, Liam? Is there any suggestions in the tracker for 6 that we haven't talked about?
I think that 6, the only, Mr. Wood had a contribution about, I think it was compensation for the Board of Assessment Review. And then Ms. Castellanos had a question about more regular assessment reviews.
Okay, I remember we discussed the regular assessment reviews, and we decided that that's something that doesn't belong in here.
Yeah, I think as a follow-up to our last meeting, I distributed some contribution from our assessor on what those suggestions are from statute on the frequency of assessments.
I have to look that up. I didn't read that either. I'm not going to say I didn't get it. Did you just send it to the subcommittee people?
I believe so, yeah.
Okay, so I'll check for that. Before the meeting, I usually search email from individuals to see if I've missed anything, but I'll look to find that. So since I didn't read it, what was his suggestions or his comments?
Yeah, he actually here I can pull this up and share it. It was actually my follow-up email where I also brought up the section of the personnel ordinance speaking to political activity on behalf of employees.
Oh, okay. I read that part.
Yep.
Okay.
So if down below that was, bear with me here. This is it. So, property valuations, main constitution, and again, Richard referenced, I think, a few, if not all of these. Again, that threshold, that assessment threshold, 70%. If it dips below that, there's a requirement to reevaluate assessed values. Full market value and you know.
So do you know why our town went about the assessment the way it did, appropriating pretty large sums of money to get this thing done, when I read that other towns do it quite a bit more often? So do you know how those that do it more often? I can't believe they spend that kind of money every year, every couple of years to do it.
Yeah, again,
The way they handle it is different. You can look at, I mean, every year you could make this adjustment to all of your property, right? You have properties that change hands, and you can look at the sale price against the assessed value of all of the properties that change hands. And let's say that ratio is 1.1. So, for every property, its market value to its assessed value is 1.1 on average across 52 properties that changed hands. What you can do is assume that is the ratio that applies to all properties in the town, and use that ratio to increase the assessed value of every single property. And towns can do that. When you do it, of course, in 1 year, there's no particular problem. But if you did that every year, by the time you get out 5 or 6 years, there are going to be some properties that really didn't go up by 10% or 2% like the average. And there are some that might have gone up by 50 or 60% based on the fact that they added a new wing to the building. Right? So, and so you rapidly get out of whack, and then you get all these appeals, and you get all these, folks coming in saying they weren't assessed appropriately. The way we do it, or did it in Scarborough, was the best way to do it. You go out and you hire an appraiser. They go around, they look at the properties, they review, what's in the files. They compare to what properties have been sold to get that market value to assessed ratios, and then they develop a ground up assessment. And it's going to be a lot more accurate than any other way of doing it. But you don't want to do that every year because it costs too much. So you do it every 5 years, every 10 years, or whenever you find you're outside of the range that the statute requires you to reevaluate your properties.
I see.
And I think the way we do it is fine.
Okay.
My assessment went up a lot, right? But it's fair. When I look at it, I says, would I sell my property for what they've assessed it at? Probably pretty close to that.
Yeah, I had no objection. I thought it was sloppy because, ours went up and I was fine with that. But because it would have got up a lot more if they would have come inside and really looked at what was here. And they didn't. And
well, you could have let them in.
Well, we did.
At my house.
Yeah, we did. I told my husband he had to let them in. But it's just interesting how I just thought, looking at what some of my neighbors were assessed, there was major inaccuracies that were favorable to the homeowner. I think the ones I looked at, it's in terms of the way they looked at it. But I guess if it's the best out there, then what can you do if that's the best they can do? It saved me and some of my neighbors certainly property tax. But yeah, I guess that's, I don't know much about it, so I have to take your word for it. If that's the best we can do in my line of work, that wouldn't be good enough. But I guess it is what it is. So we're just going to leave that alone.
That would be my preference.
Okay.
This is
That's what I'll put. I'll put that in.
Tessa does a good job here, and let them.
I'll put that into the tracker then. The other question I had for you, Liam, is we were assigned Article 1, and we did discuss it as to no changes, but there was some discussion topics. But there was Article 1 wasn't put on the tracker sheet. I don't know if that was intentional or an oversight, but I couldn't get it added. So
it wasn't included because we didn't receive any comments or suggestions on Article 1.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
But, I do show that we discussed some of the words in there, and I don't know what made us discuss those words, but somehow they were brought up.
Blame it on Alan.
Oh, was it? Okay. About what they mean. So that was just a note in order to kind of complete our whole assignment.
Yep.
So it's 3 minutes to go. We still need to address just one small section. We need to include, have a conversation with Betsy. I think instead of asking her to call Richard, I've heard her whole argument that she ought to do it in a meeting like this, don't you, instead of individual phone calls?
Well, I mean, whatever's convenient. I can go either way.
Because she works, and I don't know whether she's working from home or not. I think she is most of the time, but I'm not certain. So let's just pick another date.
How about this, Annalee? How about if we send her a note? Say, we understand your concern. You have indicated any new position. Could you define for us what you mean by a new position? And then she can respond back to us with what she thinks a new position is, and then we can evaluate that.
Okay, perfect. I'll do that. And I think, I don't have my March calendar up yet, but we have a meeting this Thursday, right, of the whole group?
Next Thursday.
Next Thursday.
But, okay, the second. Yeah, I don't even have my calendar up because I'd like to do this before our, let me, I don't have my March calendar up yet. So do you think that we could get together one last time on sometime next Tuesday or Wednesday?
That would be on the 9th or the 10th.
Yes.
Yeah, those times, those can work for me. How about Wednesday, the same time, 10 a.m.? Does that work for you, Annalee?
It does. What about you, Liam?
Yes, I can make that work. Yep.
You sure?
Yes.
All right. So we will have our one last meeting unless something gets sent back to us on the 10th at 10 o'clock. And then I'll update the rest of the tracker and we'll be set for moving forward with the full group whenever they get to us.
What I would ask you to do too, Annalee, is take a look at, and I'll send it around again, the red line of Article 5. I mean, there's nothing in Articles 1 and 6, so we don't have to worry about that. But the red line in Article 5 incorporates that language in the tracker, but does it in a way so that you can see it in context. And ultimately, I think that Nick, whoever the chair is, I think he's right. I think ultimately having a red line from each of the committees, from each of the sections, is the easiest way to deal with any final decisions around the document.
Well, you'll notice when I put in the tracker, I did delete and underline because that's how I'm accustomed to seeing things being changed instead
You'll see that the same as in the text.
Instead of italics. So yeah, I certainly will do that. If you sent it again, I'd appreciate it, Rich. I probably could find it, but
I just sent it on. I just sent it to both.
Okay, okay,
Yep.
thanks.
Okay.
And then I won't have to search for it.
Yeah, no, I'm with you on that.
Okay, so anything else that we need to do to prepare for next week?
Nope.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Thanks,
So
Annalee.
my notes will show that there was no public or council liaisons present.
That's
Liam?
correct.
Okay,
Correct.
sounds good. See you next Wednesday.